All right. Welcome in, everybody, to the Awesemo NBA Strategy Show. I'm your host, Eytan Shander. You can follow me on Twitter at Shander Show, but don't worry about me. You'll get to know me across the next hour or plenty of shows here. The star of the show, as you know, why you come here is Adam. Sure, you could follow Adam on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. We have a gigantic 6-game slate tonight to get into and make sure that you are fully prepared all around. What's going on, Adam?
How's it going, man? Excited to do our first show together. Nice to have some fresh blood.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm excited too. I'm excited to learn as well as just be here and help facilitate. But also, as you know, there are a lot of storylines that fall into everything that we kind of put into as far as the numbers and the analytics. And this is the beauty, I think, for me at least, coming into Awesemo.com, is seeing how the two merge and how successful everything truly is on the back end, because it's one thing, right, to have theory, but it's another thing to put it into practice and be successful.
Yeah, definitely. Everything kind of comes together, and a lot of fun to talk about too.
Awesome, man. So what do we look at today? We have the couple of early games. We go into the evening, and that's the meat of it tonight. So what's jumping out at you just overall in this evening slate?
Yeah, kind of like boring's not the right word, but like I was talking to someone about it that has entries in the FanDuel Live Final today, and it's just kind of like a gross slate. Like none of the games are super appealing in terms of like totals or expected to be back and forth. There's a lot of games where one team's really good, the other team is not very good, so you have some blowout risk. But of course, there's still going to be guys you can look at, still good plays. You have some big time injury news. I mean, Donovan Mitchell's still out, Domantas Sabonis still out for Indiana. The Pistons are apparently going to play their guys today, so that's always good to see. Questionable guys on the Spurs, questionable guys elsewhere. So it's still going to be some good plays, but kind of an ugly slate in terms of the actual quality of the games, I think.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a couple of big names that still linger as far as injury. And it's not just if a guy's going to play or definitively being out like Mitchell, but also how much somebody plays continued, right, with Anthony Davis. The Awesemo NBA Strategy Show, sponsored by our people at No House Advantage, taking a different spin on daily fantasy sports, offering player prop contests across everywhere: NBA, MLB, NFL, PGA, cash prizes. That's what we're talking about here. And it's exclusively peer-to-peer. The fantasy sports platform levels the playing field. It makes it easier for you to win real cash compared with the traditional DFS sites. And with over 500 player prop offerings, No House Advantage NHA is the largest provider of player props in the industry. Best part, you can download the No House Advantage app today, receive a $20 bonus on your first deposit. Promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, as you know. Awesemo is the promo code. All right, you mentioned, though, now, Adam, the first game as we start to look at it, and Detroit appears to be playing everybody, is always a good sign when you can at least rely on a team, good or bad, but you at least know who's out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen it with Detroit kind of just every other game where they're resting their veterans, every other game basically. But today we have Jeremy Grant probable, Corey Joseph probable. So right now, last night's injury report, you only have Rodney Magruder and Dennis Smith Jr. out, which from a DFS standpoint kind of makes this team miserable because like you have elevated prices now because they've been playing so many games shorthanded. Last game you had Grant out, you had Plumlee out. So it increases the pricing on guys like Josh Jackson and, Isaiah Stewart and pretty much all of these guys. Now, when they come back, they don't look nearly as appealing. I think that Mason Plumlee at 4,900 on DraftKings has some appeal, but even he's risky because he's still backed up by Isaiah Stewart, and that the Pistons are a team not looking to win games, looking to develop their young players. So I think going forward, it's pretty likely you see a 24-24 split between Plumlee and Stewart, or even 25-23 in favor of Plumlee. But with Stewart, being priced up now, you're not really looking to him. Plumlee's the cheaper of the two, and he is very productive over a fantasy point per minute guy. But still, if you're only getting around 24 minutes from him, it's not really that appealing. So I think overall, even though it is a good matchup against Indiana, I think it's pretty tough to prioritize much of anything from Detroit unless we get injury news between now and lock.
It's an interesting point, right? Because you have a ton of metrics available to you at awesemo.com where you can look at different projections through optimization, right? And at the same time, you also look at a team later in a season like Detroit that kind of guides you in a way where even if there might be not, I don't want to use the term strong, but maybe there could be a number or a metric for a player on a bad team that jumps out. You kind of have to factor in, as I'm taking from it, Adam, you kind of have to factor in how bad a team is later in the season, knowing where their main priorities are.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all about, because everything comes back to projecting how many minutes guys are going to play.
Yeah.
And so, if Detroit cared about winning games, maybe they're playing Mason Plumlee, the 28 to 30 minutes that they were earlier in the season. But that hasn't really been the case for a while. You have so when you think about the Pistons, it's kind of, like Sadiq Bey is going to get his minutes regardless. But when the team is healthy, you're talking 30 to 32 minutes. Whereas when they're not, he's getting 35, 36. He's not the best fantasy producer. So you really need those extra minutes at this price tag. Jeremy Grant, typically not playing the 36, 37 minutes he was earlier in the year. So he's still someone that he's one of the best fantasy producers on the Pistons. If you're going to someone from the Pistons, he's one of the top options, but you're still expecting, closer to 32 minutes probably here, which sort of just makes him a secondary option as well. So, as you come down the stretch during the season, it is important to keep priorities in mind. When you have teams that are competing for playoff spots, they're going to play normal rotations. When you have teams that are not competing for playoff spots, you can trust the playing time for the younger guys. But in a situation like this, in the games where the Pistons are playing their veterans, they just end up running a really deep rotation where, outside of sort of some last guys in secondary options, there's nothing that really is going to stand out.
All right. So how can we take advantage of this, right? Because the flip side is Indiana, and we know how miserable of a situation Detroit is. Malcolm Brogdon. There are guys out there, strong options. You're going to pay some money, of course, but I assume this is where we can start to take advantage of how bad of a situation it is in Detroit.
Yeah, for sure. And you have plenty of injury news to take advantage of here with Indiana because you have Domantas Sabonis out, you have Miles Turner out, and of course TJ Warren's been out. So that there's usage to go around. There's production to go around, but you also have Goga Batadze questionable, Jeremy Lamb and Doug McDermott also questionable. So it ends up being a matter of it's going to be really difficult right now until we get that news to say exactly who you're looking to from Indiana, but it's safe to say that there's going to be options that look really good because if Goga Batadze plays, he's 4,100 on DraftKings. You assume you're getting 25, 26 minutes from him without Sabonis or Turner. He's over a fantasy point per minute guy, so he looks like a really good value. If he doesn't play, then you're back in that situation that we had from Indiana last game where they don't have a center. So like last game, you had Goga, you had Lamb, you had McDermott all out, in which case you saw O'Shea Brissett play 42 minutes. If Lamb and McDermott were to be in and Goga's out, at least one of those guys is probably going to look like a good value. But again, Indiana wouldn't have a true center. So you would probably get Brissett playing huge minutes again. So it's, a favorable matchup against a weak Detroit team. And with Sabonis being out, Malcolm Brogdon, Karis LeVert, they're going to take on a bigger scoring load. They're going to have higher usage rates in this game. They're both relatively expensive, but you can still get to them. But then in the front court, you would have the potential again for just a really messy situation if everyone's out. And if they're in, then you're looking to Batadze. You have O'Shea Brissett at 4,200, who would still probably play about 30 minutes if any of the questionable guys are out. So it's kind of just paying attention to the news there, but knowing that Indiana is going to end up with some very favorable options.
Yeah, and I wonder if Brissett just is the safer option, even if Goga plays, because it's such a game time or daytime decision, if you will, that maybe that limits his minutes in its own right. And you're better off just playing the guys you mentioned, who's going to be out there no matter what. Now, that's assuming that multiple of the names that you said are out.
Right. Yeah. It kind of just will come down to the starting lineup, I think. And
Okay.
with this being the first game on the slate and the only 7:00 game, it shouldn't end up being too much of an issue. But if Goga's in and not starting, I would shy away from Goga because that clearly isn't a good sign for his playing time. If he's in the starting lineup, I'm assuming you're getting at least mid-20s in minutes from him, in which case he would look really good. Brissett, if he's in the starting lineup, alongside Goga, you're probably getting 28 to 30 minutes. But again, depending on the status of McDermott and Lamb, if those guys are out, it solidifies Brissett's playing time. If Goga's not in the starting lineup and Brissett is, and these guys are out, then you're looking at huge minutes for Brissett. So definitely a situation where I would lean towards the starters here. And then you're kind of just using the knowledge of, how many of those questionable guys are active to sort of to be able to project minutes as best as you can for the starters.
And with Brogdon and LeVert, you mentioned that the usage rate, especially with a bunch of guys out, it's going to be through the roof. We anticipate, and so is ownership. And I imagine that a lot of people are catching on to that. But still, I would imagine that even a heavily owned Brogdon, a heavily owned LeVert, knowing you're going to pay a little more for these guys because of the expected return, isn't going to, or maybe it is going to be a deterrent, because there are probably going to be a bunch of people who would stay away from him. And if you can hit him in a boom lineup, it would pretty much even out anyway. The fact that only 2/3 of the people had him as opposed to 75%.
Yeah, and I don't think ownership will get that high on these guys because the salaries have come up enough. But, you look, and Brogdon's played 276 minutes without Sabonis this year, 28.7% usage rate, 1.4 DraftKings points per minute. And you know that in a competitive game, at least, you're going to get 35, 36 minutes from Brogdon. So right. He clearly looks good even at that $8,300 price tag. Caris LeVert has played 223 minutes without Sabonis, 1.07 DraftKings points per minute, 25% usage rate. Not quite as I guess not quite as safe as Brogdon because you're not getting quite as much in the way of peripherals. The assist percentage is around 20% as opposed to 32. So more scoring dependent, but still we know LeVert's capable of going out there, lighting it up and having a big game. So, I think if I have to choose between the two, I give the edge to Brogdon just because you're getting more in the way of peripherals, but both of these guys just have massive ceilings with Sabonis out.
It's the Awesemo NBA strategy show, and watching along on our YouTube channel, make sure you smash that like, hit that like, pound the like, whatever way you all. And also make sure you hit that bell right next to it so you are fully aware and get alerts every time we are on, like Adam and all of our other fantastic analysts, so you never miss a thing, you never miss a show by any means. So let's move now as we continue, right, to look through this slate here. And we have the Spurs, knowing that they're taking on a Pelicans team that whoever's out there, they're going to score a ton of points. So always a high total that you can look at. But if, Adam, we start to look at the San Antonio Spurs now on the road in New Orleans, what jumps out initially for you here?
Yeah, so I mean, it's another team where we're waiting on pretty big injury news because we have DeMar DeRozan questionable. Yeah. We have Rudy Gay questionable. Rudy Gay not as big an issue, obviously, as DeMar DeRozan is, because DeRozan, you're talking about 34, 35 minutes, 1.2 to 1.25 fantasy points per minute, huge production there from DeRozan. So, if he's in, he's someone that is going to look like a reasonable option here. It's a pretty good matchup against the Pelicans. He's kind of expensive at 8,500 on DraftKings, but small forward's never the easiest position to fill out. So DeRozan would look fine. If he's out, though, you're talking about increased opportunities going to DeJounte Murray and Derek White. You're talking about more usage potentially even for Keldon Johnson, and then probably more minutes for Lonnie Walker at 4K. So DeRozan makes a huge, huge difference here. Like if he's in, it kind of just makes guys on the Spurs look like secondary options. Like you can still look to DeJounte Murray, you can still look to DeRozan, but they're not really going to stand out. But if you take DeRozan out of the lineup, DeJounte Murray is going to look great. Derek White's going to look better. Lonnie Walker will look like a reasonable value. And then Rudy Gay, again, a lesser impact, but if he's out, potentially solidifies playing time for Keldon Johnson. You probably get a little bit of run for Devin Vassell or something like that. That doesn't really matter for DFS, but DeRozan, the key piece here for sure to watch as, the day goes on.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I wonder if taking out DeMar DeRozan, right, and then looking at everybody else's fantasy return and rates, if you had a scenario where DeMar DeRozan is out and Rudy Gay plays, getting any number on Rudy Gay that would be value as far as if it's at DraftKings Fanduel, any number that would be valuable enough to play for Rudy.
Yeah, I mean, because Rudy Gay is someone we know also will take on a lot of usage when he's on the floor. The playing time is the bigger issue. But, if DeRozan's out, it does open up some minutes. Gay can play multiple positions as well. So if you're getting, 22 to 24 minutes or so from Rudy Gay, he's only 4,400 on DraftKings. That is a spot that you can look to. It's just, you're still not going to, it's not safe because the playing time still is unlikely to be he's unlikely to get enough minutes that he's really a safe option, but that also should keep the ownership in check as well. Like I know the other night when San Antonio was down several players, Rudy Gay was still like 5 to 6% owned at a similar price tag. So if you can get him at low ownership, he is someone that gives you a high ceiling. You just want to be cognizant of the ownership there because the floor is still pretty low with or without DeRozan.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, if he's healthy enough to get out there, he might put up 20 shots in
Yeah, I mean,
like
he'll shoot
8 minutes. He has no conscience. We love people like that with low value, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like you want, even if the minutes are risky on cheap guys, it's so hard to find cheap guys that'll actually go shoot and actually be involved in the offense that there's still merit in looking to them, even with the relatively low floors.
Yeah, so really DeMar DeRozan, let's look at that scenario though, because I think a lot of this is, and rightfully so, because we want to prepare for the worst, and that's DeMar DeRozan is out, Rudy Gay is out, and you mentioned the names now that have tons of value, especially because their numbers, as soon as that injury news comes down, will shoot up the more people jump on them. But let's look at this with DeMar DeRozan in. How big of a play is DeMar coming into this game, knowing that there again is enough of an injury to linger over him that could have prevented him from being out?
Yeah, I mean, if he plays, I assume he's healthy. He only missed the one game. It was a back-to-back. So if he plays, I'm assuming he gets a full workload, plays 34, 35 minutes. He's averaged about 1.2 DraftKings points per minute in the games he's played without Aldridge this year, and he's averaged about 34 and a half minutes per game. So it would make him look reasonable. But again, it kind of just makes the whole team less appealing because, DeJounte Murray doesn't get quite as much work when he's playing with DeRozan. He's still over a fantasy point per minute guy. He's still a very high upside guy, but his median projection will come down a bit if DeRozan is in. DeRozan himself is at a price point that's, pretty mediocre. Derek White ends up being a little bit overpriced if DeRozan's in. So it's definitely a team where there's going to be several options that you're interested in if DeRozan's out. And then if DeRozan is in, there's kind of just like a couple of secondary plays.
Yeah, a lot of guys on the stream jumping on White as well. I saw that too. David Porter, I'm on White today. So seems like it's a popular play in the background as well. Now we flip to New Orleans, right? And just curious, bigger picture here, because this is a team just from a total standpoint that has been crushing overs, and books as a result have been flipping and trying to keep up. So now from a DFS standpoint, heading into a game tonight where their opponent could potentially be down their top scoring threat, is what jumps out, knowing that we have a couple of guys, right? Steven Adams possibly missing or questionable in their own right. What jumps out here as far as some strong value and trying to take advantage of their pacing and their scoring?
Yeah, it's kind of a tough team because New Orleans is another team that up until recently, we were seeing a lot of guys be out. Brandon Ingram missed a little bit of time. Lonzo Ball was out for a while. So you've seen pricing really come up on these guys to where like they have a 116 implied total. They're likely to score a lot of points tonight, but it's tough to find value from a DFS sense in a lot of these options. So, you look to Zion Williamson first. You've seen him really pick things up as the season's gone on. He's really taken a step forward this year. Even over the last 2 months in games where both Lonzo and Ingram have played, Zion's usage rate, rebounding percentage, assist percentage have all jumped a couple of points. So that's really good to see. And you're getting a little bit of increased playing time as well, typically getting 34, 35 minutes now in competitive games. So you can certainly go to Zion. He gives you a really high ceiling. The problem is that he's priced up. And when you start looking at other options on the slate, he's not quite as good as Karl Anthony Towns, even in a tough matchup. He's certainly not as good as Nikola Jokic if you're just talking, expectation, if you're not talking ownership or anything like that. So it's really tough to prioritize going to Zion at that price tag, even though he does give you a really high ceiling. You look to other guys, Brandon Ingram certainly will fall into some lineups, especially on FanDuel where he's only 8,200. That small forward position can be tough to fill out. So I think, Ingram on FanDuel looks a little bit better than he does on DraftKings. Lonzo, not particularly exciting at this price tag. Steven Adams is probable after leaving the last game early. Certainly someone that, can get into some lineups at only $5,300 on DraftKings. He, can give you that 12 point, 12 rebound, double, but he's never someone that you're really building your lineups around. So it's a team that as many points as they're likely to score, it's kind of tough to pinpoint exactly where there's value from a DFS standpoint, I think.
Yeah, I see him at 8,800 right on DraftKings, and that's a big enough difference. But I wonder if it's just worth, if you're looking at this and you're going to pay or really overpay, right? Just like in everything. All right, I'm going to overpay on one of the two. Is it any value? Is it just worth overpaying for Brandon Ingram, knowing about the return you're going to get versus you're gutting a lineup if you're overpaying for Zion?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of similar because I mean Zion produces at a higher rate than Ingram, so it kind of just comes down to what your lineup looks like and how much money you have left to pay. They're both definitely in that category though, where they're good enough players where if you're getting them at low ownership, it makes some sense to overpay for them as long as, like you said, as long as you're not gutting your lineup to do so. But paying up to be contrarian, they're certainly in that range where they're not grossly overpriced. They're just not really optimally priced, I guess. They're pretty much efficiently priced, and so they're not going to stand out. But that makes their ownership come down a little bit as well. I do think Ingram, like I said, on FanDuel is probably going to be the easiest one to get to, just because of the need for two small forwards on that site.
All right, and let's keep it moving here, right? Because we have 4 more games to look at here, and another thing too, just real quick about this Bulls game, and we've got Chicago and Miami, and you look at the Bulls coming in decent dog here at 5, and the total is a little low between these two. So I'm curious. We already know that Miami is already dealing with the Oladipo injury, nothing new there by any means. But at the same time, the expectation of a little bit of a lower scoring game, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, this game, not particularly appealing from, like a scoring standpoint. Miami's the slowest team in the league over the last month. They've been one of the most efficient defenses all season long. Chicago's not, a great, a fast-paced team either. So from that standpoint, it's pretty tough. But you look at the pricing, and we'll have to keep an eye out for news on Miami because this is the second half of a back-to-back. You could get potentially guys sitting here, not saying it's the most likely, but definitely something to pay attention to. There's just not a ton here, I don't think. Like, you look to Jimmy Butler, you look to Bam Adebayo. Either guy is fine. Butler is similar to Brandon Ingram in that I think he's a better play on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings because that small forward position is just difficult to fill. He's a little bit cheaper on FanDuel as well. We know Butler's a very high upside guy, and he can go give you 45, 50 fantasy points pretty easily. On DraftKings, though, it's just going to be harder to prioritize that because there's more roster flexibility. Bam has averaged about 1.25 DraftKings points per minute in the games he's played with Jimmy Butler this year. You should get 33 or 34 minutes from him tonight against Chicago. Decent matchup, just sort of a secondary option, I think. And then you look to the backcourt. There's certainly a chance that Dragic or Hero will sit tonight. They've both been questionable a lot recently, so maybe you see one of them sit, but assuming they both play, you're just getting like 24 minutes from Dragic, you're getting around 24 minutes from Hero. Kendrick Nunn probably plays 28 to 30, but he's the not a particularly good fantasy producer, especially when he's on the floor with Butler and Bam. So it just becomes another team where there's not a whole lot that stands out, even though you do have high upside guys like Butler and Adebayo at the top.
Is there anything at all on the other side of it where, and I know we talk about Miami and just the obvious ones that jump out, and trust me, Nathan, I'll answer your question here in a second about the shaved head with a beard. I'm 42 and it's been decades. The last time I was in DC, probably not far from Adam, the last time I had hair on my head. When I look at though the other side of it, they're not going to finish with 70 points. Like Chicago, somebody's going to score. And that's where I wonder if there is something maybe beneath the surface for tremendous value, boom, right? Like really big risk reward and rolling with somebody in that capacity on Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago, they're still missing Zach LaVine, so
Yep.
that there's minutes to go around, there's usage to go around. Troy Brown Jr. is out as well. So, like you look to the last game against Charlotte, I think I definitely thought we would get a little bit more out of Denzel Valentine off the bench, but he only played 16 minutes. You got 26 minutes from Lauri Markkanen. I mean, it's definitely a risky team if you're looking to the cheapest guys, but I do think that there's upside. Kobe White still only 5,900 on DraftKings, 6,100 on FanDuel. Because of the matchup, I wouldn't say he's a priority, but he's still playing. He played 28 minutes in 3/4 of their blowout win against Charlotte. In competitive games, he's still playing 33, 34 minutes. He's averaged about 0.9 DraftKings points per minute without LaVine this year, but you've actually seen him pick up his assist numbers playing with Vooch as well. Vucevic, has definitely benefited White in that regard. So, you're talking 33, 34 minutes at 0.9 to 1 fantasy point per minute. Still a reasonable price tag on Kobe White, I think. Vooch on FanDuel is like $1,500 less expensive than he is on DraftKings. That's always a sign that you can look to someone on FanDuel. He's been about a 1.4, 1.5, 1.46 DraftKings points per minute so far without Levine since he joined the Bulls. So, we know what Vooch can do based on his time in Orlando. He gets more usage without Levine on the floor, gets a bigger playmaking role. So I think on FanDuel, Vooch looks like a pretty decent option.
Yeah, especially if you can rely on those minutes. Totally agree, man. Trust me, we still miss him here in Philly, at least as a backup. But yeah, that's something I guess was just trying to examine before we moved on from this game. And I think you put it right there at the top that this is one of the boring ones that will jump out from an entertainment standpoint. But just to make sure we didn't pass over any value that you might have mined, and Vooch would definitely be especially cost effective, would be the biggest one here. And this is amazing, right? You're watching, paying attention. Make sure you're subscribing all to the Awesemo NBA Strategy Show. Adam Scherer, Eytan Shander with you here, and we're halfway through. So make sure that you subscribe, but you also hit that bell right next to it, because you want to make sure that you don't just jump in halfway and miss everything that Adam just laid out for you. The maybe not so obvious to the, oh my goodness, I didn't even think of that. And that's why you come here. That's why you're at awesemo.com each and every time. And we also have a pretty cool opportunity here for you. And that's actually tonight when you look at UFC 261. Look at this. You'll get 50% off Awesemo and a monthly MMA subscription if you use our promo code UFC 261. That's insane right there. Half off, 50%. Awesemo. And also the monthly MMA subscription. Just use the promo code UFC 261. All right. Now it gets a little more exciting, right? At least on the surface, it gets a little more exciting. Let's just look at this as far as macro as it gets, right? Adam, how do we handle Anthony Davis knowing that he's going to play, but we still don't really have a definitive lock on if this is easing back into the pool, Anthony Davis, or if this is just, hey man, what are you talking about? I've already been swimming in the deep end, full on mode AD.
Yeah, I mean, he played 17 minutes in the first half in his first game back, and then, didn't play in the second half. They had said coming in that was the plan. Unless we get it, like explicitly stated that he's just free to go now, I'm assuming that he's not really DFS viable. I mean, he didn't really get a big price discount. It's not like, sometimes when guys come back from injury, the sites will just drop them to like 7,500 or something. You didn't get that with Anthony Davis. He's still sitting at 9,400 on DraftKings. So you would need him, to at least be getting like 30 minutes to start to consider him at that price point, I think. And it's just hard to see that happening. I mean, even if today they were like, okay, we're going to give him one additional one additional stint to what he did last time, then you're still talking like 22 to 24 minutes. I think it's just going to be really, really tough to consider him in DFS. The bigger impact, and the part that I think is kind of harder to gauge, is the more minutes Anthony Davis plays, of course, the less less production you're expecting from everyone else. Like, looking to guys like Kuzma and Dennis Schroeder and Drummond, like the more minutes Anthony Davis is on the floor, the less fantasy production you're getting out of those guys. So that's where it's kind of tough. Like, if Anthony Davis is only playing the first half, then you can kind of just assume that, you can assume those guys are still going to be fine, not too impacted by Davis. Whereas if now he's playing 3 quarters, the impact becomes greater. So I think that's sort of the more difficult part to gauge.
That's fascinating. I mean, this is probably one of the most frustrating things to build a lineup around, is a team that, and look, at least the Lakers have some sense of urgency, and this is not a team that's not making the playoffs where they can take their time with Anthony Davis and maybe play 6 to 10 minutes in the second half. But as you mentioned, those 6 to 10 minutes are going to kill everybody else's value out there. Now, looking at this Lakers team coming into this game tonight, I wonder if you can approach it, even though we believe Anthony Davis is going to be on this significant limit on minutes. Can we approach it where he's not playing? Does that make sense? Like, approach it where you find the guys who have had the best return without LeBron James and without AD.
Yeah, pretty much. And you also want to just kind of think about how they get there. Like one thing that I had harped on when the Lakers added Andre Drummond was that I thought it would be a bigger issue for Kyle Kuzma than it would for Dennis Schroeder. Both of Kuzma and Schroeder produced at high rates without Davis and without LeBron. But then you bring in Drummond, who's just grabbing up rebounds, and Kuzma, a lot of his increased production was as a result of increased rebounding. Whereas Schroeder, he's getting his assists, which he's going to get regardless, and he's a mid-20s usage guy, which is the case regardless. So I still think Schroeder is a pretty good option here. He was like 2% owned the other night, helped win me a tournament on DraftKings, which was pretty nice. But he's playing 33, 34 minutes. Even if you look at his numbers this year, he's played 217 minutes with Anthony Davis on the floor and without LeBron. He's averaged 1.02 DraftKings points per minute, 26.5% usage rate, 30% assist percentage. And then you assume he's still going to get some minutes where Davis isn't on the floor either. He's still, at a price point that I think is pretty reasonable for his ceiling. I still think that with LeBron being out, is just such a big deal for Schroeder. I think it makes a bigger impact than Davis being in or out. For him specifically. So it's not a super appealing matchup. Dallas is really slow, a really slow team, but I still think that there is some upside on Dennis Schroeder. Whereas looking to, I'm not really looking to guys like Kuzma. I don't really like the price tag on Andre Drummond. Certainly not looking to get to Davis unless we get word that he's, good to go. So I think Schroeder is really the one guy that sticks out to me from the Lakers.
32 minutes in, it took you that long to humble brag about winning the tournament last week?
Yeah.
I'm not lofty, man. You don't need to hold back on any humility here. You can just let it fly. I'll catch you back. Anybody on the stream throwing shrapnel, man?
Yeah. Lofty tried to just completely ignore that it happened yesterday.
Oh, see, ridiculous. No, I would highlight it. If we had more time, we would have a whole 30-minute segment on what you've done. Look at that, the Hall of Fame. Download the Awesemo profile pic.
There we go.
Awesemo.com/avatar. Tweet your wins at Awesemo HOF. Win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Look at that. That's amazing. Again, download the Awesemo profile pic. Awesemo.com/avatar. Yeah. I know it happens a lot for you, but still, there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah. It's always a good feeling.
Yeah, think about it. Guys still celebrate touchdowns in the NFL, dunks in the NBA, goals in the NHL. You should be able to celebrate your tournaments, even though you're playing at the super pro level.
Yeah. And it's always nice when it comes after a downswing too. It feels better.
Nice. Absolutely. All right. Let's flip the script here from LA to Dallas now. Kristaps Porzingis, right? The ongoing cloud of that lingers with him, and clearly the other end of it is you always know what you're going to get with Luka. It's just a matter of how much you're going to overpay for him.
Yeah, and it's a tough spot. I mean, the Lakers, even shorthanded, have still been very good defensively. They're another team that doesn't play at a very fast pace. But the thing to keep in mind here is that, and kind of touched on it at the top of the show, the pace issues aren't as big a concern on a slate like this because none of these games really have like two fast teams, and even the ones that do, one of the teams is drastically better than the other. So there's no like perfect game to target on the slate, so it makes the pace issue a little bit less concerning. Looking to Luka, he's gonna play 36 minutes. He's a 1.6 DraftKings points per minute guy. I think that you only really have at the top on the slate, you only really have Luka and Jokic and Kat. So I think Jokic out of the three is probably, he's in the best matchup. He's the most appealing, but you certainly have concerns there with it being a back-to-back and plenty of blowout potential. It's pretty easy to see how Luka ends up being the top scorer, out of this group. It wouldn't really be surprising at all. And on DraftKings, he has small forward eligibility too, which makes him extra valuable because, again, it's a difficult position to fill out. It lets you roster him at 5 of your 8 roster spots on DraftKings. So, as close to matchup proof as you can get because Luka does rebound. He gets a ton of assists. And then, of course, he's going to score a lot. So not an ideal matchup, but there's not many ideal matchups on this slate. And so I think Luka does, definitely stand out.
I see the stream giving you props too on Twitter. At least they put the tweet out. And again, you can follow Adam Scherer on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS, me here at Shander Show. So at least other people saw that. We're giving you props for that victory. Yeah. Just to put it out there. That's all. All right. And outside of Luka, now I'm curious if you start to look a little deeper on the front court, is there anything that we can mine here? Maybe even a lower cost, depending on the two places, the two sites. Is there any place that we can find good mined value on the front court for Dallas?
So we have Porzingis and Kleber are both questionable.
Yeah.
That changes a lot because last game Maxi Kleber was out, Porzingis was in. You got 31 minutes off the bench for Willie Cauley-Stein. Now, if Kleber's out and Porzingis is in again, I don't anticipate necessarily that you get 30 minutes from Cauley-Stein, but you could easily get mid-20s again, which on a slate where at least right now there's not a ton of really good value. Looking to a $3,100 Cauley-Stein for even 24 minutes would have some value. If both Maxi and Porzingis are out, then it solidifies those minutes even more. You could potentially start looking to Dwight Powell as well, who has started the last couple of games, so basically just been getting spot starts and not playing a ton of minutes. But if Maxi is in and Porzingis is in, it takes Cauley-Stein off the board. It takes Powell off the board. Porzingis is at a price point where he's pretty much tournaments only for me, I think. He certainly, has the ability to pay off a 9K salary, but it's not something that's going to happen all that often, especially in a tough matchup here. 8,200 on FanDuel, I think looks a little bit better for him, but still probably not a priority. If you're rolling the dice on some cheaper guys, assuming Porzingis and Maxi are both in, like Maxi himself is 3,700 on DraftKings, but he's like a 3/4 of a fantasy point per minute guy. He's not really that exciting. Jalen Brunson's salaries come up a little bit. So is Finney Smith. I would say for whatever reason, if you're just looking to get lucky with one of these Dallas guys, $4,200 Tim Hardaway, he's scoring dependent and he's not a really high usage guy, which is never a very good combination. It gives you an extremely low floor, but you'll typically get 26 or 27 minutes from him. If his shot's falling, he'll take more of them. And, that's kind of all you can ask for a guy around 4K. So certainly not a heavy dose of confidence, but I think 4,200, if better value doesn't open up, he's someone you can at least throw a dart at.
Are you looking at any type of value to pay out for Porzingis if he does play, knowing that you're going to pay upwards around 9, you said, for Porzingis if he plays? Is there any value there at all? Because I wonder if just, again, this is not somebody who just missed one game right over the last stretch. We're continually talking about the lingering the effects, of him and his injuries. I wonder if that is a concern at all here for Porzingis.
Yeah, I mean, if he goes, I'm not concerned about it. He played 28 minutes and 3/4 last game, didn't close against the Lakers. But typically you're going to get 32, 33 minutes. It's more so just the pricing. I mean, he's from like a median standpoint or a probability standpoint, he's just not really that likely to put up a score at 9K that you really need in your lineup. He's more likely to do something that doesn't really help you, especially when there are so many guys kind of priced around him that look pretty good. So, again, I think he looks better on FanDuel at 8,200. It's definitely a better price tag than on DraftKings. But either way, I think it's mostly just, someone you can look to in tournaments, but understand that the floor is relatively low for his salary.
Yeah, it makes sense, man. It definitely makes sense as far as, and that's why just looking at guys who may just jump out from like a productivity standpoint and their production when they're out there. And, I see it a lot with Embiid in Philadelphia and just trying to manage expectations of minutes. Now he's the extreme case of it, but just trying to manage the expectations of minutes. So that's why I ask, is because I do think that people might flock or might try and work him into a lineup if they saw what he did in limited minutes against the last game you mentioned against LA. But at the same time, if the price value is not there, then, we can definitely just keep it moving for sure.
Yeah, everything comes back to price.
Yeah, everything comes back to price, right? Absolutely. Everything comes down to price. All right, now we get into where the Minnesota Timberwolves here are taking on a Donovan Mitchell-less Utah Jazz squad. So it opens up a couple of different conversations, right? First with Minnesota, if there is any ability, also with the team itself. So now you're fighting against Minnesota, who doesn't want to win any games and is more than happy in pulling back the reins. And also a team that they're going up against that's missing one of their star players overall in Donovan Mitchell. So let's look at the, beginning value here with Minnesota, if there is anything, especially as we mentioned, everything's about price, right? So much about staying away from guys who are overpriced. This might be a game in which you can find a guy who is decently priced.
Yeah, so from the Minnesota side, I mean, it's obviously a very difficult matchup against Utah. They're one of the best teams in the league, and Minnesota is obviously not. There's a reason that Utah's double-digit favorites here, but Karl Anthony Towns is really interesting to me, especially at his current ownership. Right now on DraftKings, when you compare those three guys that are 10K or above, well, excluding Zion, but when you look at Jokic, you look at Jokic is projected for 40% ownership. Luka's at 21%. Towns comes in at 11%, which is about the same as Zion. The reason I think Towns is interesting here is he's about a 1.5 DraftKings point per minute guy on average. Luka is about 1.6. Jokic without Murray is about 1.8. So like Jokic clearly is the best of the group, but he also is in a game where he certainly could just run. They could just run Houston off the floor. He can play 25 minutes. It's really not hard to see how Towns ends up being the guy that you want out of these three. I'm not really concerned about the matchup here because while Gobert is a very good defender, Towns is someone that he can score at the rim, he can score away from the basket. He does everything so well that I'm not particularly concerned about Rudy Gobert doing a whole lot to stop him. And we know this offense is going to run through Towns. So, again, I would go to one of those other guys in cash games before I go to Towns. But I think the ownership discrepancy here on Towns makes him a really, really interesting tournament target despite a difficult matchup against Utah.
Is that something, though, that it seems like it's something that's more just on a nightly basis you can apply with Karl Anthony Towns, and then just the variable is the cost depending on opponent?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's also something where it depends on the slate, because like we've gotten a lot of Karl Anthony Towns slates recently where it's like Towns looks good, but Joel Embiid is playing and Nikola Jokic is playing, and they're all like the same price. And so in that case, you have and you'll get, like Luka and Westbrook on the slate too or something. So like in that case, it's like, okay, what are the chances that Towns actually beats all of those guys in that price range? Whereas tonight, it's a shorter slate. He really only needs to beat Jokic and Zion and Luka, which, I think is just a lot more likely than when you have, Westbrook throwing up a triple double every slate and you have Jokic and you have Embiid. So it's just a slate where there's less options up there, which makes it a little bit more likely that Towns comes through.
Yeah, Jokic at 10-9, and we'll get to him coming up in that final game there, but that's not much of a difference at all as far as, you getting a break, at least $400 difference there, at least going to Karl Anthony Towns. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially for people that are like us, right? Where we're talking about the post Embiid slate going on tonight, where you don't have to worry about him, factor that in as well. So from there, is there anything, and I'm just looking at anybody else who you might be able to take advantage of, knowing that Utah, especially if they're up big, right, which is what we expect, going to their bench earlier in the second half, and maybe allowing if starters for Minnesota who need work, or guys that they've turned to now that we can start pointing to and say you could get a pretty good number on that. But then again, it's a huge risk, right? Because this team could limp their way to 85 points and nobody would be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely risky. There's a couple of other spots you can look to on Minnesota, though. Just, you have to understand the risk. But D'Angelo Russell is only 6,400 on DraftKings. He played 28.9 minutes against the Kings last game. So we're seeing his playing time creep up, and he's still priced to be playing 25, 26 minutes. So that's someone you can look at, as far as a really high ceiling guy. And then there's actually a couple of value pieces here that, again, they're risky, but Jaden McDaniels is playing around 30 minutes a game. He's only averaged 2/3 of a fantasy point per minute as a starter. So he's not someone that you're really excited about, but he's 3,500 on DraftKings. He's someone that, just from a point per dollar value standpoint, makes some sense if better stuff doesn't open up. And then Naz Reid, center eligible on DraftKings, which is kind of annoying. You'd prefer he be a power forward, but we have been seeing Minnesota play him alongside Karl Anthony Towns more. We saw in the last game against the Kings, Naz Reid played 24 minutes while Towns played 33. I think that on average, you're probably going to get like 20, 21 minutes from Reid. He's over a fantasy point per minute guy. So the opportunity cost is pretty high since he's a center, but that is someone where, you could potentially look to just, as a low-owned tournament flyer.
Yeah, just to follow up, as we move on to the other side, the other squad here in the Jazz, just to follow that up, just looking at, there's a pretty low ownership. Now, you mentioned why with Zion and what you would have as far as the cost associated with him, but are you surprised at all? And this is early, right? So things change as we get deeper into the day and the evening, but are you surprised that Karl Anthony Towns on such a short slate for bigs is at such a low ownership rate?
No, not really. Just because I think like it comes down to Jokic just being in clearly the superior spot, being the superior player. Um, it's as a DFS sport, NBA is like the most projectable. So um, it makes sense for guys that project, better to just be higher owned. Whereas like in more volatile sports like baseball, you can get away quicker. But you still just see a lot of, everyone has access to good projections now, or most people do. So you'll see, if Jokic is projected a few points higher, he's just going to get a drastic amount of ownership because you really have to go out of your way to end up playing someone other than Jokic. So it makes sense to me, like the ownership is where it is. If the ownership were different, like if Jokic were 20% and Towns is 15%, you'd be saying just jam Jokic into every lineup because he's going to beat Towns well over 50% of the time. It's just, that with the ownership how it is, it's starting to get to a point where it's like, okay, Jokic probably isn't a 4-1 favorite against Towns.
All right, now let's look at the Jazz here, Adam, as we start to open up the conversation about no Donovan Mitchell and what that means for really the expectations, right, about Conley and Gobert, just people around the absence and filling that void of Mitchell, and then maybe somebody else who could benefit from either scoring or distribution that normally isn't in that position as much because Mitchell's out there.
Yeah, I think Utah's the first team really that we're talking about where it's just like, yeah, there's so many good plays from this team because for one, they have one of the best matchups on the slate going up against Minnesota. Really fast team that does not defend well. So while most of these games have been, kind of slow paced games, you have a fast paced Minnesota team. And then you have Utah missing someone that plays 35, 36 minutes a game with a 30+% usage rate. So you look to Mike Conley, who has played 5 games without Mitchell this year, 1.37 DraftKings points per minute. That's something that I expect to continue because the big thing here too is I know a lot of people will look and look at Conley's numbers just without Mitchell on the floor. You have to remember he's going to play like half of his minutes now without Clarkson or Mitchell on the floor. Whereas when Mitchell's healthy, pretty much all of the non-Mitchell minutes are coming alongside Jordan Clarkson, who is a high usage guy. So you're getting really, really productive minutes from Conley for like half of the game. And then the other half are still, normally productive minutes. So Conley's going to look really good here. You're getting increased playing time for Clarkson, and then you're also getting minutes for him where he's not with Conley and he's not with Mitchell. So he's still not going to pick up assists like Conley does, and that's why he's going to project lower than Conley. But Clarkson still gives you a massive ceiling because he's going to be about a 30% usage guy here. So those two, really stand out. But then Gobert in a perfectly fine spot here, should play around 32 minutes. He's reasonably priced. Joe Ingles should start and play 32 minutes or so. His price tag's come up a little bit, but he's averaged about a fantasy point per minute without Mitchell this year. So, you're expecting in an average game that you would get around 32 points from him. Then you factor in that Minnesota's an above average matchup and Ingles picks up a couple of extra points. Bogdanovic's ceiling goes up without Mitchell because his usage rate increases. So, I think it's Conley, Clarkson, as the priorities here, but Gobert looks good, Ingles looks good, Bogdanovich looks good. You can really make a case for a lot of these guys on Utah.
As you can see, Awesemo.com and a ton of tools available for you where you can be fully prepared. And of course, we're here with you as well. Adam Scherer, Eytan Shander, the NBA strategy show, Awesemo.com. And looking at the projected ownership as well for a guy like Joe Ingles, it seems like that might be one of the better values if we were creating the Venn diagram, right, where you have cost and value that we've talked about for opportunity. I guess the biggest concern I always have in games like this, and I don't know how large of a concern it is, so I will selfishly ask you, is blowout potential, right? And just cool off potential. And look, you're at home, right? And it's just very easy to sit an entire quarter when you're up 25 points. With that said, that doesn't mean that a bench player or somebody who maybe wouldn't be in that opportunity in a tight game couldn't do as much, but that's kind of where I would look at it and just be the one concern that I'd have.
Yeah, and it's a legitimate concern. The thing is, though, well, for one, when you talk about Utah, they've blown teams out so much this year that it's kind of just baked into their pricing now, because it's baked into their average playing time. But the other thing is just
that odds too.
Yeah. The other thing is just like, even if the game blows out, for one, if you're on the team that is doing the blowing out, you're producing at an above average rate normally. So, the minutes decline, but the production goes up and kind of evens out. And then there's also just so many games where, it ends up being, a 12, 13-point win, but the game's never really out of hand. So you only lose like 2 minutes at the end of the game. It's just, like true blowouts where like everybody plays 24 minutes just happen a lot less frequently than I think people give it credit for. And you see it reflected in ownership as well. Like whenever, like if this game had a 5-point spread, ownership would just be higher on all of these Utah plays because people would be more comfortable with it. So I think there's just so many factors that go into it where, yeah, it's a risk. It's kind of a risk, just like foul trouble is a risk or injury is a risk. Like it can happen, but it doesn't really happen often enough that I'm downgrading Utah guys because of it.
The Awesemo NBA Strategy Show brought to you by No House Advantage. Again, our code Awesemo at No House Advantage. You'll receive a $20 bonus on your first deposit. Last game tonight, and it's an obvious one, right? It's again, we're back to a similar scenario on one squad where we're trying to mine value on a bad team going absolutely nowhere. In fact, you could argue they're going in reverse versus one of the most obvious plays of the night. And everybody's aware of what Jokic has been doing.
Yeah, and this is another one where you mentioned that blowout risk, and it certainly exists here. So the one thing, kind of staying on that topic, it's not that like I'm not saying you shouldn't play Jokic because the game's likely to blow out at all. Jokic is, I think, probably the best play on the slate, or at least one of them. But where like that does come in is going back to like that Karl Anthony Towns conversation. One of the ways that Towns beats Jokic is just that Jokic plays 24 minutes tonight. So it's important to understand that's in the range of outcomes. It's just still not the most likely outcome. So it kind of just comes into play more when you're talking about pivots in tournaments, I think. But that being said, I mean, Jokic, just phenomenal, averaging about 1.8 DraftKings points per minute in his games without Murray this year. If this game is competitive, you're probably getting 34, 35 minutes from Jokic. Really good matchup against Houston, fast-paced team, doesn't defend. So, nothing negative at all to say about Jokic here.
Now, you mentioned, though, the speed in which the Rockets play. And again, it's the NBA. Somebody's going to put the ball somebody's going to score. Like somebody's going to get buckets out there. It may not be 40 points that you can rely on for anybody in Houston tonight, but before we just look at the obvious with the Nuggets, where is any value at all that we can mine similar with the Wolves coming into this game?
There's definitely opportunities here for Denver or for Houston, sorry, because you're not going to have John Wall tonight. Kevin Porter Jr. is out. Obviously, Harden and Oladipo are no longer on the team. So the guys that have been soaking up usage all year long are not playing. So you're going to get probably Kelly Olynyk taking on a bigger role, getting increased usage and potentially playing time. 6,700 at center on DraftKings is still a pretty scary price tag, but there is at least upside there. On FanDuel, I know yesterday he was priced down. Today he's at 5K on FanDuel. I think Kelly Olynyk on FanDuel is phenomenal. Riskier obviously on DraftKings. But you also can look, Armani Brooks started and played about 30 minutes yesterday. He's still 3,800 on DraftKings. He should have the ball in his hands a bit more with Wall out. That's, I think, one of the better point per dollar value options. On FanDuel, he is 4,200, which is still fine. Nothing, wrong with that, especially because he's a shooting guard instead of a point guard. So I think you can look there for value. Jayshawn Tate's been playing huge minutes recently. That's a spot where, it's risky. He's not the most consistent fantasy producer, but you're probably going to get 35, 36 minutes, and somebody needs to do some scoring for Houston. So, I think Tate and Olynyk would be the guys I look to first as far as ceiling goes. I think Brooks for value. And then you can also look to KJ Martin for value, potentially playing 24, 25 minutes at close to minimum salary as well.
Come on, K Court 17. That's what we're trying to do, is provide the value here. Watch Brooks or Martin explode. We're coming back to that comment. All right. Now let's flip to the other side of it, though. And we know what we're going to pay, right under 11,000, right, for Jokic. And the ownership rate is going to be through the roof. You already mentioned about Karl Anthony Towns really 2 times over, Adam, about the value that he presents on this slate next to Jokic. But let's look at it from Jokic's side, as far as maybe people and even the high ownership not really being that much of a deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I think Jokic, like ownership agnostic and just ignoring that aspect, he's the best or one of the best plays on the slate. In cash, you should have Jokic. Like, don't play Towns over Jokic in cash. Don't play probably anybody over Jokic in cash. He's the highest projected player on the slate. So, but by a lot. Like right now, looking at our ownership projections, we have Jokic projected like 9 points higher than Luka, which is it's a ton, but it also makes sense. It's a great
Right.
matchup. He produces at a really high rate. There's nothing to dislike about Jokic. It's simply that in some lineups, and something we talk about a lot is that individual ownership doesn't matter nearly as much as the ownership of your lineup. If you have a lineup where you've already made a couple of contrarian plays in tournaments, by all means, just put Jokic in. Take the points. But it is a spot where if you have a chalkier lineup and you go Towns over Jokic, at the current ownership, at least, I think it is a spot that makes some sense. So that's really all that I'm saying there. But, Jokic, I think ignoring just that component is the best play on the slate.
Yeah, and that's really it, is just trying to figure out if there was maybe a not so obvious deterrent to play Jokic tonight. And I think the blowout factor would probably be the only one as a concern, but it's not a deterrent, meaning like, oh, no, don't play him as a result of that. Like they may blow him out by 30, but somebody's got to put that work in early.
Right. Yeah, it's more so like when I think about the blowout here for Jokic, it's not so much I'm looking to get away from Jokic because of it. It's more so if I happen to have Cat, it's one more thing that can work in my favor is maybe that game just, gets out of hand. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's no reason to dislike Jokic here.
So let's look now as we've seen this team formulate an identity without Jamal Murray, where the value lies in guys that have filled that void and benefited as a result from even Jokic becoming more of a facilitator.
Yeah, so one big thing left to keep an eye on. Will Barton left yesterday's game early. I'm assuming he doesn't play today. If he
Yeah.
doesn't, you're getting PJ Dozier as I think one of the best values on the slate. He had been playing around 25, 26 minutes off the bench. He started the second half in place of Barton yesterday, ended up playing 29.7 minutes. He's about a 0.8 or so fantasy point per minute guy this year. So getting him at 4,100 on DraftKings, I think, clearly stands out. 3,900 on FanDuel at shooting guard, one of the best values. It also opens up minutes most likely for Campazzo, who's been starting, and you're seeing play like 28 to 30 minutes, but then at times Dozier's closing over him. Campazzo probably gets a couple more minutes, with, assuming Barton is out. He's cheap and a pretty good value. And then you can even look to Austin Rivers, who played 24 minutes yesterday. He's someone that, has some value here as well, although he's certainly riskier than Dozier or Campazzo. So you have all those guys as value options. And then in the mid-range, you have Michael Porter Jr., who has a really high ceiling. He's averaged over 1 fantasy point per minute without Murray this year. Typically, he's giving you around 34 minutes per game. Aaron Gordon has been disappointing from a fantasy standpoint in Denver, and to a large extent, that's just because of his role in this team. He's there to defend and then kind of just, clean up everything else, a little bit of scoring, a little bit of rebounding and all that. But he does have the skill set and the talent level where I think that his ceiling is just a little bit further away from his median projection than a lot of players, because he's capable of doing so much when he's on the floor. Denver doesn't really ask him to because Jokic does it all, but he's a good enough player where I still think, even if on average he's like a 0.8 to 0.85 fantasy point per minute guy, I think you're going to see some games as the year goes on where Gordon just takes over and has a monster game. So I do have interest in him in tournaments for as long as his price tag is down around 5,500.
Awesome. Is there anything else that we've missed across this slate here? Because just to look back at it, it's been amazing. I can't even believe that this thing is over right now. The Awesemo NBA strategy show has flown by. Adam Scherer, Eytan Shander, and just looking back in our final minute or so, if there was anything that we've missed, because I think you've pretty much combed through everything as deep as it can get, and as using the applications that we have clearly at awesemo.com, Adam. But this has been fantastic, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a fun show. Yeah, I think just kind of as like an overview, like Denver's going to give you a ton of value today. Utah has a ton of underpriced guys. Houston's going to give you a bunch of value, even though it's a risky spot. And then it's sort of just, mixing in whatever fits from these other games, because they're not going to grade out quite as appealing. But we are still waiting on really big injury news in Indiana. We're waiting on big injury news with the Spurs that could open some stuff up as well.
Awesome. Again, give us a like, subscribe, make sure that you hit that bell after you subscribe, or if you are subscribed, that you click on that bell so that you get all of the alerts, everything that we do, from DFS giveaways to shows like the Awesemo NBA strategy show. And from there, just pay attention to everything that's going on. Use everything you can here on awesemo.com. Adam Scherer, Eytan Shander. Follow us again on Twitter for me, Shander Show, ShipMyMoney DFS. For Adam, at Awesemo NBA. Again, subscribe, like, and make sure you hit the bell so you know everything going on. Good luck.